I would take the stairs before being in an elevator alone with this man. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing another Greek retellings 5x5. Alright, before I get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is your favorite Greek retelling. Let's say other than Percy Jackson. So if you're new to my channel, I have a series in which I am trying to find 5 5-star reads with a single theme. I have not succeeded thus far, but I will put a link to the playlist in the cards up above. Like I said at the beginning, we are doing another round of Greek retellings. I did a Greek retellings try last June, I think it was, and while it went fairly well, it did not succeed. However, I am back with another 5 Greek retellings, which honestly shouldn't be terribly shocking because 1, I really like any sort of a retelling, but 2, I have been obsessed with Greek mythology since I was a kid. For the layout of this video, I am going to start out by giving you a summary of the book I am reading, followed by a 50% update with an estimated rating, and then a final update with an actual rating. Starting out with The Silence of Girls by Pat Barker. Now, this is one I have heard floating around on booktube for quite a while, and I knew it was a retelling of the Trojan War through the eyes of the women. We are following Briseis, who was the war prize taken by Achilles in the Trojan War. We start the story following her at the Siege of Troy and see how her life progresses as a prize of war. Hey y'all, so I have just nearly hit the halfway point into The Silence of Girls by Pat Barker, and holy crap, this is a rough read. It is gritty and somber, and it almost feels completely hopeless every single time you pick it up. I am impressed with the author's writing. Between the absolutely desolate tone and Briseis' thoughts, which convey so much emotion, while she does her best to remain as impassive as possible. There are such well-woven quotes throughout this book that really encapsulate the struggles that women are facing during the Trojan War. The descriptions are all very vivid and really encapsulate the atmosphere exceptionally well. While I can't help but feel nothing but depressed when reading this book, I am still pretty flabbergasted by the author's writing. On that note, I really only knew a very vague idea of what this book was. I knew it was an Iliad retelling, and that was about it. But in this case, I definitely think I probably would have done better to have more of an idea of a synopsis when going into this, because there are so many content warnings that need to be mentioned. Briseis is clearly a strong woman who, even while facing this absolutely terrible existence, still manages to remain incredibly strong-willed and never forget the atrocities that she has lived through. I do wish we were seeing more of her relationship with the other women in the camp. We do see a little bit of her relationship with Helen in flashbacks, which was very interesting, and I did like seeing that side of the story, seeing as how Briseis is often blamed for the issue between Achilles and Agamemnon, and obviously Helen is blamed for the entire Trojan War. I thought that was a very well done parallel between those two. With the other women at the camp Briseis is being held at, really just feel like the discussions that could be drawn around the relationships between all of them are kind of a missed opportunity. I can't really fault this book for being depressing given what it's about, but this book is really hard to read at times. I mean, I don't want to pick this book up. I am continuing to read it. I do think that Pat Barker is bringing some justice by bringing attention to things that are often ignored when talking about the Trojan War. Still not a book I look forward to. The plot itself is also pretty monotonous. Even though I'm at the halfway point, it feels like I have read so much of this book, like it's really slogged on to reach this point. All in all, I feel bad only estimating 3.5 stars for this book, because part of my negative feelings are just towards how difficult it is to read at times. I can't help it. I'm sorry. Like, I do like depressing books, but this one's pretty hard to read. I just wish we were really getting more about Briseis' character and her relationships with the other women in her life, and if we were getting more of that, perhaps I wouldn't mind that this is such a difficult read. Hey y'all, so I finished out The Silence of Girls by Pat Barker, and I kind of regret it. So by the end of this book, I really just felt like the story was not about the women at all. It was literally about Achilles. That's fine. I don't mind reading a book about Achilles. But if I'm going to, I would prefer to be sold that from the very beginning so I know what to expect. But you know what I expected? A story about the women of Troy and the troubles they went through within the Trojan War. I guess technically I did kind of get that, but it felt like literally the women of the story weren't even the main characters, where this book is supposed to be highlighting them. For the first half of the book, we see it purely through Briseis' eyes. I liked her as a character when we were first introduced to her, but I wish we had seen some growth from her. She remains completely stagnant for the entire book. Nothing really ever changes about her, so I just started to lose interest with her character. It also felt like a complete lost opportunity that there wasn't more focus on the relationship between the women in this camp. Instead, majority of the book is purely focused on the terrible things that the men are subjecting them to and their responses to it. I honestly don't think this book actually even passes the Bechdel test. Any conversation the women have is just about their relationship with the man that owns them, the abuse that the man has been doing unto them, the different relationships other women have with other men within the camp, the struggles Briseis feels between trying to stay true to her family, to her people, and the difficulty she has in just trying to be seen as a human being within this camp is incredibly well nuanced and heartbreaking. I also thought that Achilles' character was quite well layered and created, though I did have a pretty hard time sympathizing for him, like it seemed the author was trying to make us do towards the end of the book. Perhaps if this had more of a 50-50 breakdown between his perspective and Briseis, I would have, but at the same time, I'm not really sure why that was even necessary to begin with, because isn't the focus of the story supposed to be on the women? Seeing through his eyes doesn't add anything to Briseis' story. I mean, most of the time he doesn't even remember her name. Sure, that showcases he doesn't really acknowledge her as a human being, and even with that one point, it had been well established. I mean, you didn't need Achilles' perspective to reinforce it. Like I said at the very beginning of my review for this, it's gritty, it's dark, it is somber, the whole tone is just incredibly oppressive, and I just needed a little bit of levity. A little bit. I understand that this is a very heavy, hard-hitting topic to look at, and I think if Pat Barker had put more focus on the relationship between the women and the camaraderie they had at the very least, that would have been something, but we hardly even see that. That just made for a very difficult reading process, and sure, that's probably intentional, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Honestly, most of this book feels like it's just a rehashing of the Iliad. It doesn't even really change all that much being from Briseis' perspective for like 3/4 of the book. The final bits of the book, though, those really annoyed me. I actually started skimming probably the last 5 chapters because by that point I didn't really care anymore. But then it basically told me that what I expected from this book was wrong, and that I was wrong to expect that, because the entire focus of the story will always be on men. But that's literally what the title and the summary of the book sells me, is the story of the women. So don't act like that is the obvious point in all of this. That really rubbed me the wrong way. And I also felt like that final little bit was a direct slight at Song of Achilles because it romanticized the story. But you know what? I enjoyed reading that book a lot more than I enjoyed this one. I can enjoy a depressing book, but like I didn't enjoy this. My final call pile breakdown came down to a very low 2.5 stars, but honestly, I think I'm just gonna put it at a 2-star because yeah, I'm bitter at that ending. I'm not gonna be continuing the series, and I probably won't pick up anything else Pat Barker writes because clearly I can't trust her summaries to sell me what her story is going to be about. Well, not off to the best start. I'm still a little bitter about this one when I think back on it, if I'm being completely honest. But anyway, hopefully with this next one, Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati, we'll have better luck. I actually want to mention the fact that I got a ARC copy of this through NetGalley, and I want to say thank you to them as well as the publishers. Seeing this sold as for fans of Madeline Miller's *𝗖cie* was enough for me to request it, but I read the summary and was even more intrigued. This book is following Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, another woman from Greek stories who is often vilified for her role in multiple tragedies. Hey y'all, so I am just shy of the halfway point in Clytemnestra, and I am still enjoying this. It's strangely slow while also moving quite quickly. I must say I adore the number of sisterly relationships we are seeing. We have Clytemnestra and Helen. We see a little bit of those two alongside their cousin Penelope. Then we see more of Timandra, Clytemnestra's younger sister, as the book goes on. And I was surprised to see that the author slid in some representation with Timandra, seeing as how she is absolutely head over heels in love for a girl in her fighting circle. She actually likens herself to Achilles at one point, which I found very hilarious. Just noticed my Scooby had fallen over. I must say, I'm really impressed with the fact that this book does not shy away from the brutality of the Spartans, whether male or female. Clytemnestra is a vicious fighter, and even once she gets pregnant, it doesn't dim her character. She still has a brutal personality. She doesn't become a purely maternal figure, which I do find very refreshing, but at the same time, we do see some interesting discussions around a maternal identity in Clytemnestra's mother, Leda. The dynamics between the men and women in the society become even more prevalent with the introduction of Agamemnon. Doesn't matter what book it is, he is always the absolute worst. But I do think 𝗖cie has characterized him perfectly because he is so unsettling. He just takes up the entire page with his presence. I would take the stairs before being in an elevator alone with this man. Before Clytemnestra ever actually suffers from his hand, she still isn't afraid to speak up against him to protect those lower than her because she knows that what he does is not right. Holy hell though. When this takes a dark turn, it takes a dark turn. When we get some depth into Helen's character, holy shit, you really see how even though the Spartans seem like they are such a feminist society by training their women to fight, at the same time, they're just as awful as every other patriarchal society at this time. Theseus gets away with kidnapping and raping Helen because he's a hero and that's his right, and that also feeds into the awfulness of Clytemnestra's father's character. All of that though, it only darkens whenever Helen ends up marrying Menelaus. I don't really know how to pronounce his name, but Agamemnon's brother. Clytemnestra never loses her fighting spirit. Even though she's so vicious, she still separates herself from Agamemnon because she isn't cruel. She's brutal, but she's never evil. And by this point, she is literally just sustaining herself with revenge. She is going to have vengeance no matter how long it takes. Not long ago, I just passed a 15-year time jump. On one hand, definitely caught me off guard, but also makes perfect sense. It does make the shift in her personality more startling, but whenever we get to see a little bit of the original Clytemnestra, it just reinforces that she is surviving to find vengeance, and it's so good. From the get-go, the atmosphere in this book, it just feels so absolutely perfectly Greece. The heat bearing down on you, the cool wind, olive and fig trees everywhere, the beautiful artwork and architecture that is surrounding you. I really squealed whenever we actually were following Clytemnestra to 𝗖cie because I've literally been there. I know what that looks like when she is describing the tombs that she is walking by. I know what those look like. I've literally seen them with my own two eyes, which is just, it's so cool. It's such a surreal experience. Thus far, I'm having such a freaking good time with this book. It's so good. I'm really liking it. Estimated rating, I'm gonna have to put it out of 4 stars. I want to rate higher, but we don't do that. We know it always ends bad. So 4 stars it is. Hey guys, so I officially finished out Clytemnestra. That rage, that determination that I talked about in my last update, it just grows all the more in the rest of the book. You can feel Clytemnestra's hate towards Agamemnon. You can feel the coldness in her personality now that something has happened because we finally get into the Trojan War. And at the beginning of it, there's an event that occurs, which I knew was coming. I knew that was gonna happen. And yet, I had still grown to care about that character, especially through their relationship with Clytemnestra, that whenever I hit that scene, it was still heartbreaking. It was still very difficult to read. And then after that, there's a 9-year time jump. And that final time jump, all of that resentment has just been consistent for so long. And the fact that Agamemnon isn't there, I think it just makes it all the better because she hates him even more from afar. She really throws her all into being the queen, and with that, I adored the way Casati would bring up the parallels between the two of them and the differing reactions they've received. But guys, when he comes back and she finally gets to act on her revenge, oh, so good. It was so satisfying. I was on the edge of my seat during that scene. The way she owns it afterwards, it's beautiful. It's so good. It's so good. And the parallels between her avenging her daughter in comparison to a son having to avenge his father in the society, beautiful. Beautiful. We do see her relationship with Electra, and it definitely is a little tumultuous. It's not nearly as easy breezy as her relationship with her other children. I just wasn't quite convinced by Electra's hatred for her mother. There's like throwaway lines here and there to explain it, and we do see that Clytemnestra does treat her daughter differently. I just wasn't convinced by that dynamic between the two of them. I wanted to see more of their relationship actually on page and more time to actually understand why Electra has come to resent her mother so much. With that, I do think it's very interesting where Casati chose to end the book. There's another major element to the story that occurs, but Casati doesn't cover it in this book. So because of it, the ending of this book is almost a happy ending. It's as happy as it can be for Clytemnestra. Anyway, across the board, this book was really fantastic. The writing was just beautiful. It was so stunning. The atmosphere was strong throughout the entire story, and the character creation, amazing. The different dynamics and the familial relationships, sort of romantic relationships, like seeing different romantic relationships and styles between the couples. I do think that the pacing dragged a little bit in the middle, but even when that happened, I was still invested the entire way through. There are two major time skips, the 15 years and the 9 years, which does kind of mess with pacing, but I also think they're necessary given how much time goes throughout Clytemnestra's story. In the end though, my final rating for this was 4-star, a very high 4-star, but I highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it, especially if you like 𝗖cie. I think this is a perfect comparison story. It wasn't 5 stars, but I did still really enjoy that one, and it did go a lot better than the previous book. But I was just as excited to pick up the next one, Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes. This one is sold as a Medusa retelling, and obviously everybody knows the story of Medusa, the Gorgon with snakes for hair and the petrifying stare who was slayed by Perseus. However, this one focuses on Medusa as less of a monster and more as a victim. Hey y'all, so I've hit the halfway point into Stoneblind, and oof, okay, unfortunately it has taken me quite a while just to get this far into this book. It's just not doing it for me, which is a real shame because I do enjoy Natalie Haynes' writing. Her writing itself is very strong, her atmospheres are very transportive, character creation is interesting, and I do think each of the characters we've seen from does tend to stand out from one another. However, the titular character is Medusa. She feels like a very minor character in this book, which is supposed to be a retelling of her story. We spend a lot of time with characters that are not Medusa. I do understand how all of these characters tie in together and how they will eventually impact her and her story, but it feels like the focus is not actually on Medusa. Rather, it is mostly on Perseus and Athena. My issue is that she doesn't really feel like a driving force in her own story, which is what I would expect when it's a retelling of her story. I would think she would be more at the forefront of it rather than continuing to make the frontrunner of it be Perseus. With that being said, there are certain elements that I do think are cleverly handled. For example, the parallels between Medusa's rape by Poseidon and Hephaestus's attempted rape on Athena. Enjoyed the way Haynes presented both of these women's reactions, especially seeing as how Athena ends up punishing Medusa for Poseidon raping her in Athena's temple. There is also some subtle humor in this, especially whenever we are seeing from the perspective of the gods. The little sniping between all of them and their interactions with humans are pretty entertaining too, because they're just so detached. They just don't get certain things. Really, across the board, I think thus far my word to describe this is just kind of bland, and it doesn't feel like anything new. It doesn't feel like Haynes is really bringing anything interesting and unusual to the Medusa story. So with that, I have gone back and forth on deciding whether or not I want to DNF this book many times now. I actually decided for a while that I was going to temporarily DNF it, keep it on my library app, but not actively be reading it. But at this point, I really don't have any other books that I need to pick up right now, and I still don't want to pick this one up. That's kind of telling me I should probably just officially put it down. Also, the fact that I am trying to keep myself from sliding into a slump makes this book even less appealing, because I'm just so worried if I push myself through it and it turns out to be 3 stars or less, it's gonna make my descent into a slump happen faster. Ouch. Yeah, that one hurt. That one hurt a lot, because I was really looking forward to that one. I was lucky enough that Phaedra by Laura Shepperson was picked for a book club I wanted to partake in. Phaedra is the little sister of Ariadne, as well as the Minotaur, purely focusing on Phaedra's story and how she came to be the wife of Theseus. Hey y'all, so I've hit the halfway point into Phaedra, and right out of the get-go, I am pretty settled into the story, because in the beginning we are covering the exact same storyline that Jennifer Saint did with Ariadne, just from the perspective of Phaedra. And while I think that's a good thing, because I already feel as though I understand the story, I know where it's going, at the same time, I don't think it's off to the best start, because I don't really feel like thus far Shepperson has really covered anything new or added an interesting element with this perspective of the story. We do actually have different perspectives. We don't purely see through Phaedra's eyes, which did catch me off guard a little bit. We're actually going to see from many different women's perspectives as this book continues, and unfortunately, I don't really think the writing in the characters' voices is different enough to really distinguish them. Thankfully, I am listening to the audiobook, and it is a full casted audiobook, so I would recommend going that route. Once again, with a book being named after a character, I assume that that character is going to be the main focus of the story. I assume that we are going to have the most background about them. But Phaedra just feels pretty bland. Thus far, I think my biggest word to describe her would be naive. Initially, I was actually really frustrated that we weren't seeing more from her perspective, but then I realized a lot of the times the utilization of the other female characters is in order to showcase parts of the story, specifically around Theseus, which Phaedra isn't directly a part of. That's cool, I understand how that's progressing the story forward, but Theseus is the main focus in the myth, so you're not really doing anything different when the story is supposed to be from Phaedra's perspective if you're just continuing to focus on Theseus. Although Phaedra is naive, I do appreciate that she has finally come to realize the pain that the women around her are enduring, particularly the servant women around Athens. There was one quote I really enjoyed in regards to that. "Any man can throw words up into the air, and it is women who must pay when those words land." Hippolytus is just a total prick. He is just as obnoxious as his father, except in this very holier-than-thou way, because, you know, he's promised himself to Artemis. How can you tell that he worships Artemis? Don't worry, he'll tell you. One of the other women whose eyes we see through is Medea, and I was very intrigued whenever I heard that, because she is a sorceress. She is a character that is often vilified due to you know, what happened in her marriage with Jason. I thought this would be an awesome opportunity to sort of lean into that characterization so that it foils Phaedra. And I will say, Shepperson has surprised me by not quite doing that. But at the same time, again, it just feels like so far she is more often than not furthering Theseus's story and not really Phaedra's. She also just doesn't quite stand as much as her own character. Some of her chapters are quite long, and so much time is dedicated to Theseus or discussing her trying to run away from Athens that we don't really get to see as much of her character as I would really enjoy. The writing itself is okay. It is definitely not atmospheric at all by comparison to the other books I've read for this video so far. It also feels like it spoon feeds me a lot of things. Like there will be an opportunity for the author to show me something rather than tell me, and she'll show it to me only for the next line to then explain it. It's like you didn't really need to explain it. Like I got it the first time around. So yeah, once again, this is not going great, and I don't have high expectations for this. So right now my estimated rating is like 2.5 stars, unfortunately. Hey y'all, long time no talk. Unfortunately, I have also decided to DNF phaedra. It just wasn't doing it for me, and specifically what really took the cake was whenever phaedra spoke to... Y'all want to calm down? Whenever phaedra spoke to or in front of men, just every single time, it felt so childish. And I assume that's probably because she was quite naive. Shepperson definitely was not playing down the age difference this time around between 𝗖cie and phaedra, which I do appreciate that. But at the same time, she managed to make phaedra sound like she was a 10-year-old anytime she spoke in front of men. And it was so cringy, it was so uncomfortable. I could not handle it. And I suppose there's probably something to say about the fact that she is still so innocent. After having looked up the events of the rest of the book, I can kind of see the route this was going to take. After I was once again having to stop this book, cringing in response to things she was saying and like how the men were reacting to it, I just realized I'm not going to keep reading this. I don't want to keep reading this. That is a real shame. I don't feel too bad because looking at other reviews, it seems I'm in pretty good company. A fair amount of people have rated this on the lower side, so I don't feel like I'm being too harsh with this review. It's just not working for me. This video might be telling me that I should probably take a step away from Greek retellings, and I'm very bitter about it. The final book, because I'm in too many now for this video to just give up. Heroes by Stephen Fry. This is technically a sequel to Mythos, which I also read in that previous 5x5, whereas that one was focusing on these stories of the Greek gods. This one is focusing on these stories of the Greek heroes. However, they're all retold by Stephen Fry, who is an absolutely phenomenal actor. And I'll say it once, I'll say it a million times, I highly recommend the audiobook. Hey guys, so I am shy of the halfway point into Heroes by Stephen Fry. I truly feel like such a cultured adult reading this, but at the same time, it is absolutely incredibly entertaining. It's just so much fun, and Fry's narration is absolutely fantastic. Yes, I have been listening to the audiobook of this one as well, just like I did with the first book, because Stephen Fry telling me a story, I mean, like, I just love his voice, so of course I'm gonna go audiobook route. But in his writing of the book itself, he just makes everything very easy to understand. It's very digestible, and I think that's really impressive with Greek myths because he says so himself. They can get really confusing. There are a lot of characters that are the same names, and there are so many of them that get thrown at you. But he even makes a comment at the beginning, like, you don't necessarily need to remember everybody, and he does do a fantastic job of introducing those characters to us anytime a new name is mentioned, and if it is a name we have heard previously, he specifies whether this is the same person or a different person. As far as the stories in this one go, I do think this one's a little different in layout compared to Mythos, because with the stories of the gods, it's a lot easier to kind of start with one and then build off of it, whereas with the heroes, most of these characters don't really ever interact with one another very often. So because of that, this is a lot more segmented out, and it does make them feel like more short stories. We have the title page with whatever hero it is we're going to be following, and then he has segmented out the stories themselves from there. A very easy example there is with Hercules and the 10 Trials. We have the original introduction of Hercules, the explanation of this character, his background, how he becomes a hero, and then from there, how he was involved in the trials, and then how each of those trials go. Fry just makes these stories very accessible and so easy to read and very fun, and the audiobook just really adds to the entire experience of the story because he does such fantastic narration, and then his humor and dry wit really comes across a lot better, particularly when it comes to the footnotes, which are absolutely hilarious, and usually he leans into discussing the more layman person's reactions to this sort of stuff. in comparison to obviously like a classicist's reaction. Classicist, is that the right term there? He highlights the ridiculous aspects, he talks about the humor in some of these stories, and he even highlights whenever there are certain stories that different classicists say went in different directions or have a different viewpoint on them. I'm really not surprised at all that I'm enjoying this book as much as I am. Honestly, I'm very glad that I saved this one for last for this video. I am gonna estimate 4.5 stars. Never do 5, but like, I'm not gonna be surprised if this is a 5. Okay, so I just recently finished this one and I don't really have too much more to say apart from my previous commentary. I really enjoyed this one, same as the first book in the series. I think Fry does a phenomenal job of laying out all of the stories. He doesn't lose the main focus of the story, but he does take the time to mention different discrepancies that come up, whether it's based on the historical timeline that is given to us, or whether it's based on whichever classicist is telling their version of the story. I appreciate that he even gave some attention to a female hero, Atalanta. I appreciate that he doesn't hide away the fact how weird some of these stories are. Incest, bestiality. He highlights the fact that many of these stories are pretty queer also. And something I really adore is that oftentimes he'll tie stuff in through these stories to current day topics or words or ideas, different things like that. For example, with Oedipus, he talked about the Oedipus complex, the term that Freud coined, and he talks about how, technically speaking, it doesn't even really make sense because Oedipus ran away whenever he was told that story. He did not want that to come true, so, you know, little misleading there, Freud. Across the board, this was absolutely fantastic. I definitely do think it is the best of this video, and thankfully, this got 5 stars. I'm really glad we got at least 1 in this video. Otherwise, this would have been really heartbreaking. All right, y'all, so that is it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!